No, you're good. And that tells me my microphone's working. So good morning, church family. Everyone have a great weekend so far? Anyone didn't have a great weekend so far? That's probably more important. Hearing silence, I guess everyone had a great weekend. My class material today might be a few minutes short, and so I'm going to encourage a lot of questions. If I need to, I'll jump into next week and get a good start on that, but my preference would be to end at the end of this week. So I'm going to encourage, if you got questions, please feel free to stop me and ask. So we've been looking at biblical archaeology, and we're trying to answer the question, does archaeology support the Bible? And there's a lot of writers out there that says no, archaeology doesn't support the Bible, but I'm hoping that by now I've probably convinced you that either I have convinced you or I haven't convinced you that there's enough information out there that archaeology truly does support the Bible. Last week, we concluded our discussions on Genesis chapter 12 and the cities of Bethel and Ai, and we talked a little bit about the meaning of the Negev, and then we began to talk about Genesis chapter 13, verse 10. And so we finished with chapter 12, and we'll begin with chapter 13. And this is our verse. We're starting in verse 10. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. And then in parentheses, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Moses felt the need to put that in there. As typical, if I've underlined it, that's me, that's not in the original text. And the underlined words are potential place names. So we have three potential place names in verse 10. There's Zoar, and I got Bella in parentheses behind that. We'll talk more about that in just a second. We had Sodom and Gomorrah. So today we're going to talk a lot about Sodom and Gomorrah. I'd like to point out that the use of the name Zoar here in Genesis 13:10 is another one of Moses' anachronisms. Genesis 14:2 tells us that the name of the city was Bela at the time that Abram and Lot is at the hills in between Bethel and Ai, and they're looking out towards the Jordanian plains. 5 chapters later in Genesis 19, verses 18 through 22, tell us that the name was changed to Zoar, meaning small or insignificant, after Lot flees there during the destruction of Sodom. This is another example of Moses using an anachronism to help his audience understand the geography. It's not really important here, but I tend to point these things out because when we get to Exodus, it becomes real important there. Alternative archaeological sites have been proposed for Sodom and Gomorrah, and we'll talk about them in just a few slides. Before we talk about the archaeology sites for Zoar, Sodom, and Gomorrah, we need to look elsewhere in the Bible to see if there are any clues about the location of these three cities. The city of Zoar is mentioned 9 times in the Bible. Sodom is mentioned some 47 times, and Gomorrah is mentioned 24 times in the Bible. Geographical information can be gleaned from Genesis chapters 13, 14, and 19, as well as Deuteronomy chapter 34. From Genesis 14, we find that there are 5 cities of the plain, also called the Valley of Siddim, and also called the Dead Sea Valley. In Hebrew, Siddim means plain. So we got Valley of the Plain. probably gives you a hint that this is a very flat place. Okay, this is not a mountainous area. In addition to the cities of Zorah, Sodom, and Gomorrah mentioned in chapter 13, chapter 14 adds Admah and Zeboian as noted in the slide. Genesis 19, verses 27 through 28, tells us that Abraham saw the smoke from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah from the plains of Mamre near Hebron. So there's a hint about the location. And then Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 1 and 2, tells us that Moses, while standing on top of Pisgah, I just had to put that in there for this audience, top of Pisgah on Mount Nebo, across from Jericho, could see the promised land, including the whole region from the valley of Jericho as far as Zorah. Verse 7 makes the point of telling us that although Moses was 120 years old, his eyesight was very good. So to summarize, the Bible's information regarding the location of Zoar, Sodom, and Gomorrah, they are in the valley of Siddim, which is also called the Dead Sea Valley. They are part of the 5 cities of the plain. Smoke from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah could be seen from Mount Hebron, and they are continuous with the valley of the Jordan. So that's what the Bible tells us. So before we try to locate the valley of Siddim, I want to introduce archaeological proof of the existence of the 5 cities of the plain. In 1975, at the archaeology site of Tel Mardik in modern Syria, and at the ancient site of the city of Ebla, Paolo Mattei of the Rome University found some 15,000 tablets that are now being called the Ebla tablets. Since that time, another 2,000 tablets have been found, bringing the total to over 17,000 tablets. The tablets were written in ancient Sumerian. The tablets date to in between 24,000 or 2250 BC, in other words, before the flood. They contain literary text, incantations, poems, hymns, economic records, tax records, receipts, and other business dealings. They also contain court records, case law, and other legal records. Of special interest to Bible students is that a number of Old Testament cities are referenced in the tablets. These include Salem, which would eventually become Jerusalem, Hazor, Lachish, Megiddo, Gaza, Joppa, Damascus, and others. Of interest to this particular class is the mention of the 5 cities of the plain, just as the Bible calls them. The cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboian, and Bela are listed in the same exact order that they're listed in Genesis chapter 14. Note that Zorah is listed as Bela, because that's what it was called in 2300 BC. So these cities, all of them, existed before the flood. So that leads us to ask, where is the Valley of Siddim, or the Dead Sea Valley today? And here's where the problem of locating the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah gets hard. There are 2 schools of thought as to where the Valley of Siddim resides, and of course, there is a proposed site for Sodom in both of these 2 areas. Before we go over the 2 proposed sites for the Valley of Siddim, let me orient you to this map. This is a map of central Israel, and the Dead Sea is located here. The Jordan River is this white line going north here. Jerusalem lies to the west. Right here it's labeled as Salem. It underlined Jerusalem there. I don't know if you can read it from where you're sitting, unless your eyesight's like Moses. Mount Nebo is right here. This is the place where Moses stood, and the Bible tells us that he could see the land as far north as this way. He could see all the way down to the Mediterranean Sea, and he could see down this plain all the way to Zorah, wherever Zorah is. And by the end of the day, I'm going to convince you that Zorah is down here. Bethel and Ai, where Abraham and Lot are standing, as the verse that we're talking about is right here. Mount Hebron, from where Abraham saw the cities burning, is right here. Any questions about the geography? Okay. So one proposed site for the Valley of Siddim is the lightly shaded area north of the Dead Sea on this map. This area has the advantage that it is clearly seen from the high plains of Bethel and Ai over here, where Abram and Lot were deciding who will go where, as described in Genesis 13. It also seems like a logical place for the 5 kings of Mesopotamia to engage in battle with the 4 kings of the plain, as described in Genesis chapter 4. However, actually, I got that reversed. It's 4 kings of Mesopotamia to engage with the 5 kings of the plain. Sorry about that. However, this region does not have the tar pits as described in Genesis chapter 14. There is a proposed site for the city of Sodom in this region at the modern-day Tel et Haman, which is this red X right here. Archaeological excavations at this site began in 2005 and went for 16 seasons. This is a large site, about 300 acres. It appears to have been founded around 2000 BC, which would mean that it was there at the time that Abram and Lot had their discussion about separating. It had thick fortified walls, towers, and gates. A destruction layer was found. The occupation of the city stopped, and the city was left abandoned for some 700 years. This destruction layer was about 4 to 5 feet thick, and it contained ash and human bones. Pottery sherds were found that looked like they had undergone a brief super hot flash heating, similar to those seen at the nuclear explosion sites in Nevada during the nuclear weapons testing era. Skeletal remains were found that looked like they had been violently torn in half. Scientists proposed that an airburst occurred above the city, causing the destruction. All of this sounds consistent with the Bible's description in Genesis chapter 19 of the destruction of Sodom. However, one problem exists. Actually, more than one, but a huge problem. The destruction later is dated to 1650 BC, which is some 200 years too late to have been witnessed by Abraham. No other sites in the region have been excavated, and there are no proposed sites for the other 4 cities of the plain. The other proposed site for the Valley of Siddim is the lightly shaded area south of the Dead Sea. This site better fits the Bible's description of the location of Sodom. Genesis chapter 10, verse 19 lays out the borders of Canaan by naming the cities on its borders. The border begins with the northwestern border city of Sidon, which is off the map up here. And it moves southerly along the western border until it reaches Gaza in the south. And that happens to be on the map right here. Then the southern border crosses over to Sodom, which presumably, by this theory, would be over here on the southeast border. Then the border moves northerly along the eastern border to Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboian, and as far north as Lasha, which is off the map up here. If Sodom is on the southern border of Canaan, then it really can't be north of the Dead Sea as proposed by Collins, because if it were, then that southern border would look like this, and the city of Hebron would not be part of Canaan, and that would be inconsistent with Genesis chapter 23, verse 2, which clearly places Hebron as a Canaanite city. In addition, Genesis 14:10 describes the valley of Siddim as being full of tar pits. There are no tar pits in the proposed northern site, but the proposed southern site is well known for its hydrocarbon bitumen or asphalt-like deposits. In another passage, Genesis 19, Lot and his daughters flee to the neighboring small city of Bela, which is then renamed Zor. The Bible lists Zor, or Bela, as one of the 5 cities of the plain, and thereby close to Sodom. Other than that, the exact location of Zor is not found in the Bible. However, in several extra-biblical texts, the location of Zor is stated to be south of the Dead Sea. These sources include Josephus in the 1st century, Eusebius in the 4th century, Jerome in the 5th century, and the Madaba map in the 6th century, which is on a floor in a church in Jordan, and that map still exists. The floor still exists, the church still exists. You can see it today. Lastly, Ezekiel 16:46 clearly places Sodom as a city south of Jerusalem. If Sodom were north of the Dead Sea, then it wouldn't be south of Jerusalem, it'd be northeast of Jerusalem. So, this southern location is the most likely location of the 5 cities of the plains. I'm going to zoom in on that area in this map here. So this is the southern part of the Dead Sea. These are the 5 archaeological sites for the cities of the plain. All of them appear to have been occupied at the time of Abram. 4 of them appear to have been destroyed by fire. 4 of them were abandoned for centuries after the destruction. All of the sites have very large cemeteries. The cemeteries at the sites have been extensively excavated, while the ancient cities themselves have had mixed attention, little or no attention, really. The northernmost site, located at Bab ed-Dira, this one here, has been proposed to be Sodom. Another site located 8 miles south of that is Numira, which has been proposed to be Gomorrah. The third site, located another 8 miles south, is Gor Es Safi, which is proposed to be Bela or Zor. The fourth site, located 9 miles south of that, is proposed to be Admah. And the 5th site, located 4.5 miles south of that, is proposed to be Zeboian. The 2 northern sites have been extensively excavated, while the sites at Haifa and Kenazir have had very little attention. The cemeteries at all of the sites have had a lot of attention. In the 2 northern sites, destruction layers have been found at both sites. Destruction appears to be by fire at both sites. And like the site proposed in the north, human remains were found in Numira. The problem at both sites is that carbon-14 data of the destruction layers places the destruction at about 2350 BC, about the time of the flood, about 500 years before Abram and Lot. This has caused many to conclude that these are not the sites of the cities of the plain. However, in a transcript of a podcast that was made just last month, Dr. Titus Kennedy cites the work of others that demonstrate that the use of carbon-14 dated methodology for multiple samples taken from the same Bronze Age era layers can be as far as 1,000 years apart. He quoted one recent paper that reviewed the original 1984 carbon-14 data from the proposed Sodom site, And that top quote is the quote from that paper. Given these results, it could hardly be more clear that radiocarbon dates produced from the Bab ed-Dara and Numera were really quite worthless for the purposes of chronology. He then cited numerous archaeology sources that state that pottery evaluation is a better dating method for Bronze Age sites than carbon-14. He then stated, and this is the second quote there, just looking at the pottery, which is the main thing we have to go by in those early periods, it looked like they were destroyed around the same time. He's talking about the two cities. In the Middle Bronze I period. This would overlap with the time of Sodom and Gomorrah were occupied from biblical data and chronology. So Dr. Kennedy is making a case that we should just ignore the carbon-14 data and move on. So to summarize the archaeology of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Ebla tablets serve as an extra biblical source that indicates that the 5 cities of the plain were known to others outside of Canaan long before the time of Abram and Lot, in fact, before the flood. Burials in the 5 cemeteries in the Dead Sea Plains also indicate the presence of cities long before and during the time frame of Lot's arrival to Sodom. The northern site for Sodom, proposed by Collins, does not meet many of the biblical requirements for the city of Sodom. The southern site, proposed by Albright, does meet all of the biblical requirements for the city of Sodom if you exclude the carbon-14 data. Archaeology supports the Bible's claim of a massive extinction event at 4 of the sites. This event occurred at the same time at all 4 sites. Archaeology also confirms the Bible's claim that Bela, which was later renamed Zor, was not destroyed at the same time as the other 4 sites. Archaeology cannot at this time determine which site belongs to which biblical city. So before we move on to Zor, are there any questions? Oh.
Looking at the map, what would you say, 50, maybe 25 miles from southern Baltimore up to the northern? Or approximately?
35 at the most. Yeah. Between the northernmost and the southernmost. Yeah.
Was there a road that ran from
Yes. Yeah, there's a major thoroughfare, if you will, a trading route, if you will, well documented in sources outside of, in fact, when I talk about Zora, we're going to talk about that road. Outside the Bible, well documented. Trading spice route from way down south, Saudi Arabia, going all the way to Iran, in Turkey.
Is it saying that carbon-14 is not a reliable?
Yes, and they're not the only ones saying that. It's been a common. Carbon-14 is useful for some periods like Iron Age. It tends to be pretty close. I mean, that they can get within 10 to 20 years. But when you get back into the Bronze Age and even further back, it seems that the error widens quite a bit. And so, you know, we've all heard about things being dated to 10, 20 million years. It's likely that those dates are not accurate, although that's not universally accepted by the scientific community. But when you compare those dates with archaeological findings, if it's older than Iron Age, and by Iron Age, what do I mean? From the time of the conquest to us, from the time of King David to us, the dating seems to be pretty good. But from King David back, the dating does not seem to match.
So Lot went north of the Dead Sea, Abraham came south?
So he was at Bethel in Ai. Let me back up to the maps. Probably easier to. So they were at Bethel in Ai when Abram and Lot were together, and presuming they went down here, which I believe, he would have traveled. The Bible actually says he traveled east to begin with, so he would have traveled down to Jericho, crossed the Jordan, and then came down this east side of the Dead Sea down here. That's what would be proposed, assuming that the southern side is the side of Sodom, Gomorrah, the 5 cities of the plain, and Zorah. I'm sorry?
That's Abraham.
That was Lot. Now, Abram, and we're going to talk about this next week, Abram, after they left, God told him to look around the land. Go north, go south, go east, go west. Take a look at the land. And it doesn't really indicate whether he did that or not. But what it does indicate is when he finally settled down, he settled down in the plains of Mamre here near Hebron. So Abram went this way, Lot went this way. Abram had all of this mountain hill area, what's called the Judean hills, to feed his flock. Lot had all of this area in here to feed his lot. So it worked out well for the two of them, with the exception of Sodom's about to get destroyed.
They weren't really that far apart,
30, 40 miles? Yeah, about that. Israel's not a big country. Don't know, anyone other than me ever been there? You can walk across it. It's not that big. Jesus walked all over the place in it. It's not a big country. And yeah, it's about, from Hebron to about over here. You can stand on these hills and clearly see the Dead Sea. It's easy to do. Bible says that Moses stood here and he could see all the way out to the Mediterranean here. Said he could see all the way out to Zoar here, and he could see all the property. But then the Bible makes the point that although he's 120 years old, he had very good eyesight. Other questions? Yes.
Speaking of that, for those of us who've mainly been in the States,
Okay.
if you were to take Israel,
Yes.
what state could you fit it in comfortably? I know Colorado and Texas,
Yeah, you've stumped me on that one. I'd probably say New Jersey.
that's small.
It's a small area. Israel is not that big.
But yet people are fighting over it like cats and dogs.
For thousands of years. We'll talk a lot about that next week as well. Yeah. This is the garden area of the Middle East, and everyone wants it.
Now, didn't Lot pick the best place to go?
So if you take a look at a satellite map of this area up here in particular and along here, green. Most of this area is desert and it's brown. And then you get to the Judean hill country here and you'll see green again. And then around the coastal plain it's green, but there's an area in here and there's a name for it which escapes me at the moment, which is brown. So yeah, Lot picked probably the best and easiest area. Turns out Abraham probably had the better spot after all. Well, it didn't get destroyed is one good area. Turns out Abram lived the rest of his life around here. Long period. I mean, he was 75 when he left Haran. He lived to 125, but that's Sarah. He lived longer than Sarah. I guess 135. He was 135, I guess. So he lived 35 and 15, 40, almost 50 years. he lived 50 years around this area here, so it couldn't have been too bad for him.
In your visit to Israel, did you take any pictures?
I did. I was heavily escorted by the IDF while I was there, the Israeli Defense Force. I was there in a military capacity. I did take some limited pictures. I was discouraged for taking pictures. And they were 2x2 slides, which have long been, I've moved a dozen times since then and have lost those 2x2 slides. But yes, I did take pictures. Primarily around Jerusalem. Other questions? All right, let's talk about Zor then. By the way, thank you for all those questions. So that leaves us with just Zor or Bela left. As I mentioned earlier, Genesis 19 tells us that after leaving Sodom, Lot and his daughters flee to the neighboring small city of Zor. The Bible lists Zor or Bela as one of the 5 cities of the plain and thereby close to Sodom. Isaiah 15:5 mentions Zor in connection with the nation of Moab, which lies at the southeastern end of the Dead Sea. Other than that, the exact location of Zor is not found in the Bible. However, in several extra-biblical texts, the location of Zor is stated to be south of the Dead Sea. These sources include Josephus, Eusebius, Jerome, the Madaba map, and a whole bunch of others. In trying to find Zor, archaeologists searched the ancient texts and found that Zor served as an important stop in the Aqaba to Jericho trade route, which you were just asking about. The text portrayed Zor as a town erected in the middle of a flourishing oasis, watered by rivers flowing down from Moab mountains in the east. Many texts mention the sweet dates that grew abundantly on the palm trees surrounding Zor. Today, archaeologists locate the biblical Zor at the modern-day Gor Es Safi. This is a topographical map of the Dead Sea. Gor Es Safi is located in the red circle down in the southern end of the map. Northeast of that site, in the black circle, is the remains of a Byzantine-era church which claims to be the site of Lot's cave, mentioned in Genesis 19:30. Everyone see that okay? Okay, good. As I mentioned earlier, Zor is mentioned 9 times in the Bible, once in Genesis 13 in relation to Lot's viewing the land prior to his separation from Abram, twice in Genesis 14 in conjunction with the 5 cities of the plain, 3 times in Genesis 19 in connection of Lot's escape from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, once in Deuteronomy chapter 34 in connection with Moses' viewing of the promised land from Mount Nebo. Also once in Isaiah 34 in association with the land of Moab, and once in Jeremiah 48 as part of the prophecy of the destruction of Moab. At the time this is occurring, it would have been, what would have been called? The Salt Sea, yes. The Salt Sea. Although archaeologists have excavated the Gor Es Safi region every season from 1986 to 2017, excavations have been focused in 3 different sites. The first is an ancient cemetery that has been in use since the early Bronze Age, or 3100 BC. This would have been before the flood. The second site is a sugar processing factory from the Byzantine era. So this had been long after most of the biblical accounts, all of the biblical accounts. The third is the remains of a Byzantine era church at the site of Lot's Cave, northeast of Gor Es Safi. Minimal excavations have occurred at the Middle Bronze Age site that was in existence at the time of Lot. However, due to the number of early Bronze Age era graves at the cemetery, archaeologists have determined that there was a substantial settlement at Zorah from 3100 to 2000 BC, roughly around the time of the flood. Again, based on the number of graves from the Middle Bronze Age era, the size of the settlement was much less substantial at the time of Lot, which is why the name was changed to Zor, meaning small or insignificant. I'll pause here for a second and tell the story that's in the Bible about why the name was changed. The two angels go to Sodom, and you know the story about what happened there in Sodom, in Lot's house, and right outside of Lot's house. And so the angels decide they're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and the entire region. And they plead with Lot to get his family, his daughters, his sons-in-laws, and flee to the mountains. Lot is concerned that he won't make it to the mountains in time before the destruction occurs. So he argues with the angels and says, hey, can I just go to Zor, Bela? Can't I just go to Bela or Zor? Because Zor is small and insignificant, so you can spare it. And the angels agreed, okay, flee to Zor. We will not destroy Zor. We'll just destroy everything else. But hurry, because we can't do anything until you get there. Boy, did I misjudge this time. So that is the reason why they changed the name to Zor, because it was small and insignificant. I have just a few slides left. I will rush through them. However, the size of the settlement was quite large during the Iron Age, during King David's time. At the time of the biblical judges, the time of King David, King Saul, King David, and Solomon. There were settlements there during the Roman period, the Byzantine period, and the Muslim periods. This is a photo of Gor Es Safi today, as seen from the mountain areas. Gor Es Safi is in that red circle. It's the brown spot there. The building that you see in the foreground is the museum at the lowest place on earth. That's not my description of the museum. That's the name of the museum. Museum at the lowest place on earth. This is a picture from Gor Es Safi looking towards the mountain where Lot's Cave is located, and that red circle is the site of the Byzantine church there. And this is a picture of Lot's Cave. Actually, it's a picture of the Byzantine church on the right. The black hole off to the left there is the entrance into Lot's Cave. And that's described in Genesis 19, verse 30. Any questions? Great. I appreciate all the questions that you've asked. And if there are no questions, next week, very important. Next week, we're going to be talking about the plains of Mamre, the cave of Machpelah, and Hebron. So let's get ready for worship services.